Well, we kicked off this series several weeks ago, and through the first three parts of the series, we focused on a different word. Part one, we looked at this word unconventional, that God is an unconventional God. From the beginning of time, before the beginning of time, like God has just been, doing things in the most unconventional ways, and he's trying to accomplish his purpose, and he will do everything he can to accomplish his purpose. Even though there's moments where he will do things that will just leave us scratching our heads, going, God, like, why did you do it that way? And God, in his unconventional ways, uses, people like you and me, unconventional people. And I get that for some of you, you're like, yeah, Chris, you don't know my story. My story is messy. My story is complicated. My past is, there's dark parts of my story that, like, God just can't use me. And when people say that to me, you know what I look at them and say? Have you ever read the Bible? It's filled with stories like yours and mine, like messy, dark, complicated stories that God, in his unconventional ways, uses unconventional people like you and me, to accomplish his immeasurably more. That God has and will accomplish his immeasurably more than we could ever dream of, ask for, or imagine, to accomplish his purpose. And his purpose is simply this: to tell everyone about his unconventional love, his unconventional grace, his unconventional hope. And when we really grasp the simplicity of God's purpose for all people to understand his love for them, when we truly grasp God's purpose for everyone, the macro side of everyone, it's about every. And who fits in that category? Everyone. But that we are part of the every, because each one of us, we're a one, aren't we? Every one of us have our own unique storylines that God wants to use to reach the every. I mean, think about your story, because you're a one. One of the questions I love that probably gets asked the most across all of our churches, the question is simply this: how did you take a step into Tri-County Church? And what we love about that story is it always reflects what God has been doing in someone's life. Maybe in a subtle way, but it always reflects it. Several weeks ago, I was talking with someone after one of the services, and I asked that question. They were newer in the life of Tri-County Church, and I just asked that. So how did you come to Tri-County Church? How did you take that step in? And the wife started telling me the story that for years and years, friends, a whole bunch of friends have been inviting them to church. She goes, we have probably received thousands of invite cards. And there's part of me that was like, I don't think that's an overstatement. She goes, just stacks of them. Facebook messages, shares, text messages, phone calls. She goes, our friends have not left us alone. And finally, we got to the point, after years and years and years, she goes, we finally just said yes. She goes, now we can't stop coming. And that just reflects, right, what God had been doing in so many people's lives to be so persistent. How did you take a step in? Did someone bribe you to come? Did someone beg you to come? Did someone keep inviting you that you just wanted to shut them up and so you came? Did someone lie to you? I know it's church, but did someone lie to you? They're like, surprise, it's church. Right? Like, think about how you took a step. I know for some of you online right now, you're hiding in the dark recesses of the World Wide Web, watching church right now, interacting with church, even though you're sitting by yourself or sitting with some people and you're just not sure yet. But you took a step. You took a step. See, all of us have a story because all of us are part of the one. We're all part of the one. For my wife, Kim, and myself, and for Kiera and Claire, our step into the life of Tri-County Church was officially on October 31st, 2016. I can't believe 3 years. 3 years. Several weeks ago, a guy named Ben, he's on our team here. He sent me a YouTube video link. It was from his private YouTube files, and he sent me this link and said, I don't think you've ever seen this video. And I watched it, and it was just short little video, and it was so moving. Because here's what I didn't realize. I didn't realize someone was capturing this moment. It was a moment where my wife and I were sitting down with a small team of people. Dan, who's on our Tri-County team, and Craig and Mary Ruth that are on our leadership team. They sat down with Kim and myself, and it was that last official conversation where they asked us to join the Tri-County team, and where Kim and I just said yes. And as I watched this moment, again, I had no clue that it had been recorded, and Ben had taken this footage, and he had edited it down and put music to it and all this, and it just never got shown. And as I was watching this, some 3 years ago, I think about the unconventional. The unconventional that God has done just in my life, in Kim's life, in our family's life. We're part of 3 major, huge cities. And God says, hey, I want you to go to the influential major metropolis of Du Bois. Right? That's God's unconventional storyline. I think about the last 3 years of what God has done in the life of his church, and it's filled with the unconventional of God's immeasurably more to reach everyone. We were sitting, when this video was shot, we were sitting in a coffee shop called Avenue 209 located in Lock Haven. I never would have dreamed of or imagined that we would now have a church in that area. The immeasurably more that God has done in his unconventional ways to reach everyone. And you see, it's the story of his church. For almost 2,000 years, God's church, a gathering of people, a movement of people to tell everyone about Jesus, hasn't been stopped. Think about that. World powers have come to being and been crushed. War after war after war over the last almost 2,000 years have happened. Guess what? The movement of the church has not stopped. It's why I've shared about what's happening in Iran right now. Why so many of you have watched that documentary, Sheep Among Wolves. If you still haven't watched it, I can't recommend it enough. You want your faith to surge? Watch it. What God is doing in one of the most unconventional countries right now as his church surges. Why? Because God is after them measurably more to tell everyone about Jesus. Nothing stopped his church. Nothing's going to stop his church because God will do everything he has said he's going to do. And that's why I think about this church located in the influential city of Corinth. Paul's writing this letter, and it's dated somewhere around 55 AD. And when you think about that date, it's some 20-ish years after Jesus leaves this earth. The movement of the church, they didn't call it the church. It was this movement of people called the Way. But Paul's writing this letter some 20-ish years after Jesus left. The church had exploded. It was taking over the known world. And Corinth was one of these influential cities. In 146 BC, Rome conquered Corinth, destroyed it. By 44 BC, they had rebuilt Corinth again. It was a major influential city. So it didn't have one seaport, it had 2 seaports. The economic engine of that area, it was pretty prolific as so much trade was going in and out. Corinth rivaled the 2 great Greek cities of Athens and Thebes. Corinth was that city. And Paul was writing to the people, the church, located in Corinth. And Paul wrote, and now, brothers and sisters, we want you to know about the grace that God has given the Macedonian churches. And now this phrase, the grace that God has given, it's such an important, life-altering phrase. What Paul was saying is, hey, God's grace, his unmerited favor through what Jesus did on the cross, something that you didn't ask for, you don't deserve, and you can never repay. That's God's unmerited favor. God's just his grace, something we didn't ask for, we don't deserve, we can never repay. He goes, the grace that God had given the Macedonian churches. Now, Macedonia was this region north of Corinth. Corinth was in the south of Greece. Macedonia was a region way up north. Cities like Philippi and Thessalonica were part of Macedonia. And those two cities, actually, Paul wrote letters to those cities. We have a book in our Bible. It's a letter to the church in Philippi. It's called Philippians. And there's two letters that Paul wrote to the church in Thessalonica. It's called 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. So those two churches were up in this northern part called Macedonia. And Paul says, hey, church in Corinth, you're such an influential city. Not one seaport, again, two seaports. I mean, influential cities. He goes, I want to tell you a story. And here's the power of story. The power of story reflects what God is doing in the lives of people. It's why we as a church, we just embrace the story culture. Every Tuesday, our staff, we tell stories. We spend an hour every week telling stories of what God is doing in the lives of people, in your life. It's why every weekend across all of our churches, we tell stories. It's why last week during part 3, I spent half of the message telling story after story after story after story of what God is doing in the life of people. Because guess what? It's what it's all about. And now Paul's going to tell a story. He's going to tell the story about what's going on in the life of the churches in Macedonia, in the lives of people like you and me. And Paul goes, hey, they're in the midst of a severe trial. Now, we're not sure exactly what that severe trial was, but we're pretty sure we know it was all tethered to them being Christ followers. You see, when the movement of the church, of Christ followers, swept the known world, people didn't know what to do with it. I mean, up to that point, you had your nationality, you had your race, your culture, and you were tethered to that. And one country wanted to conquer the other country to wipe out that nationality, that culture. But what happened with Jesus was, all people, no matter your race, no matter your culture, no matter your nationality, no matter your socioeconomic makeup, no matter if you're free or slave, male, female, it didn't matter. Now with Jesus, everyone was one. And there wasn't a category for that. And so persecution erupted to try to stop this movement of Christ followers, the people of the way, what we now call the church. That was their trial. Let me ask you this. Are you going through a trial right now? Is that the season you're in? Because the specifics of the people of Macedonia, their trial looks different than maybe what you're going through, but what we all know. We all know what a trial feels like. Is your trial right now, you're going through a nasty divorce, and your ex or soon-to-be ex is now using your kids as pawns in the divorce? Is your ex, soon-to-be ex, now using your finances, your assets as a pawn in your divorce, and you have no idea? Your heart hurts for your kids because you see what's happening. You don't know what your future looks like. You don't know financially how you're going to make it. That's your trial. Let alone grieving a marriage that has crumbled. Now you're just trying to keep your life, the few pieces left of your family together. Is that your trial? Is your trial a medical diagnosis that you're waiting for? Maybe you just received the results and the doctors have no clue. Maybe you know what the results are. Maybe it's for you, or maybe it's for a loved one, a friend, a family member, a spouse. You're right in the midst of it, and that's your trial, and you have no idea what the future holds for you. Is your trial, you started a business, you poured your entire life into your business, all of your life savings, your resources. You just went all in on this passion, this idea, and you're 30 days, 60 days, 90 days from seeing your vision, your dream crumble, let alone all of your finances. Or right now, you're just not sure what your next season on a job is, and maybe your company's coming to a close, or you got a new boss, and you don't like him, or you don't like her, and you're like, I got to get out of here, it's so unhealthy, and you have no idea what's next. And all the fear that gets tethered to what is next, and how am I going to survive, and how are we going to make our finances work? Are you thinking about retirement and you're just not sure what this next season is going to look like for you? And there's a whole lot of emotions because you've spent a lifetime working and now you're just not sure. Is your trial the past that you've tried to ignore? And what happened to you as a child, what happened to you growing up, and you've tried to ignore, and you've come to realize that trying to forget continues to impact every relationship you have now. And you're finally starting to face it. What's your severe trial? If you're not in one now, one's coming your way. We get life. What does it look like? And in the midst of the Macedonian severe trial, Paul tells us that extreme poverty. Why? Because when you're a Christ follower in this early movement, since cultures and races and communities didn't know what to do with this new group of people, they just stopped doing trade with them. I mean, it was a whole trade barter system. Like if you grew this crop, you would trade this crop for this crop and what you need. If you did this trade, you would trade your services here for this service, right? It was all about, hey, I can do this. I'll do this for you. And all of a sudden, if you're a Christ follower, your business relationships are severed. And Paul used this word extreme, meaning to the furthest extent and beyond. Paul is saying here, not just it's kind of bad poverty. He's like, no, this is the worst poverty you've ever seen. I've been around the world. I've seen extreme poverty. But here's what I know. Even what I've seen, there's worse poverty than that. And Paul is painting this picture saying, hey, you have never seen poverty like this. And what's interesting with this word poverty, here's what I know. For some of you, it's poverty. For some of you, you don't know where you're going to get money to feed your kids next week. It's real. For some of you, winter is coming and you're trying to figure out how you're going to pay your gas, your oil, your electric bill to heat your place, wherever you live. And you're right now trying to make the determination, what am I not going to spend so I can heat, so I can feed? For some of you, Christmas is coming and everyone's excited, wow, Christmas. And you're thinking to yourself, there's no way. There's no way. I can't give my kids anything. For some of you, that's your picture. That's real. I think for many people, there's a different mindset. There's a different thinking. The thinking, well, you wouldn't call yourself poor, like I wouldn't call myself poor, but you would also, and I wouldn't either, we wouldn't call ourselves rich. Is that the category you find yourself in? You know, not poor, but certainly not rich. And if you're in that category like me, right, I'm not rich, but I'm not poor. This is the mindset that creeps in. And I think this is the mindset for the people in Corinth. I think this is maybe the picture that Paul was trying to paint. And this is the mindset. Mindset is what I don't have that someone else has that I wish I had. Do you think like that? This is how it goes, right? Your friend, I mean, you like them. They're a good friend. All of a sudden they get a new truck. And you're talking truck. Not truck, you're talking the big wheels, the big bed, the big engine. It can haul a whole bunch of stuff. And now you look at your truck, and you're like, I want that truck. Been there? Of course you have. All of a sudden, your friend buys a new house, and you're excited for him. You're like, wow, new house, that's awesome. And then all of a sudden, you're like, oh, yeah, we could use 500 square feet more. What I don't have that someone else has that I wish I had. Social media has ruined this, by the way. I mean, this happens. Right? You go scrolling through social media, and all of a sudden you see your friends who are now at Disney World. That just happened to me. Some friends from Vegas, their entire family, they're at Disney World right now. They have their matching Disney shirts on. They have the Mickey Mouse ears on. And you know what I found myself doing? I want to go to Disney World. They're at Disney World. We should go to Disney World. It's real. And it happens usually without us even paying attention to us. Think about how much debt you've gotten in because of this. What you don't have that someone else has, what you wish you had, and now you're like, oh, there's credit. I can pay for it later. And I think many of us, again, wouldn't consider ourselves poor, not consider ourselves rich. But it's this mindset that creeps in. And I think, again, we don't know, but I think As Paul was thinking about the church in Corinth, I'm just wondering if the people in Corinth were thinking, yeah, we're pretty good off. We have 2 seaports. Things are pretty good here, but we're not like Athens. We're not like Thebes. I mean, those ancient cities, whoo, like that's another tier. And that's why Paul was telling the story about the church in Macedonia. And Paul says, in the midst of their severe trial, extreme poverty, guess what erupted? Overwhelming joy. Overwhelming joy. Some of you have experienced this. In the midst of your severe trial, your step of faith with God, his peace settles in. And when God's peace settles in the midst of your trial, joy erupts. It's an amazing moment. This summer, I went and sat with someone who's in the hospital. He had severe pain, and he had no idea what was going on. The doctors were trying to figure out what was going on. I just sat with him and just prayed with him and talked with him and just did some life with him. And across the course of the journey, he was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And when I first talked with him, just so much fear of the unknown. Understandable. Last weekend, he walked up to me. Overwhelming joy. He's still stage 4 cancer. He's still going through chemo. And he looked at me, and I tell you, I'm getting goosebumps now, because he looked at me with joy and peace that's tethered to God, and he goes, hey, I'm facing it, and God is with me. I tell you, so many times we ask God to take away our severe trial, and God's like, I could do that. But I want you to see who I am in the midst of your trial. And Paul's like, hey, they're in it. It's as worse as you can imagine. And joy is erupting because they're tethered to God and they're seeing God show up in the midst of their trial. And welled up within them. You know what surged within them? You know what erupted within them? Generosity. And I think Paul, heading off, because Paul understood just human psychology. Again, we haven't changed that much. Technology has changed, right? But human beings, we're basically the same. And Paul trying to head off the but. I think Paul was sitting there writing this letter, and he's like, I know what they're going to say. Yeah, but Paul, how do you really know how bad it is? Paul, how do you really know that they have overwhelming joy? How do you really know? And so Paul goes, for I testify, I was there. I witnessed it. I saw it. Paul wants to make it clear. No. I saw their severe trial. I saw their extreme poverty. I saw their joy in the midst of it. He's like, hey, church in Corinth, I was there. I witnessed. And I testified that they gave as much as they were able. And I think Paul paused there. And I think when Paul paused there, you got this big smile on his face. It's like, they gave what it was able and beyond their ability. Beyond. And it's easy to read words like this. And maybe if you're more the logical one, maybe if you're the person in your relationship, in your marriage, maybe you're the spreadsheet person. You know who you are, and that's okay. Embrace if you're the spreadsheet person. You're like, yes, I love spreadsheets. Some of you are like, what's a spreadsheet? You're not one. But for you spreadsheet people, you could read these words and like, wait, Chris, okay, extreme poverty, but they gave what they were able and beyond. Is that fiscal responsibility? It would be easy to say, no, it's a step of foolishness. It's a step of foolishness. It's easy to just apply that label to what Paul's writing. And again, I think Paul is just, because God the Spirit was working in him, he's just always a step ahead of us. And what Paul was trying to paint this picture of, it's not about a step of foolishness. It was all about the step of faith. Step of faith. And that's why Paul wanted to make sure he cleared this up. This is not like bad financial planning. It's not like we should recommend to the church in Macedonia that they should go get a financial advisor to help them with their finances. No. Paul was trying to highlight the step of faith, and he wanted to make it abundantly clear to the church in Corinth and to us, Tri-County Church, some 2,000 years later. He goes, it was entirely on their own. Paul's like, I didn't guilt them, twist their arm. You know those sappy videos that you see late night, the commercial comes on and you start crying. You're not even sure why you're crying, but you're like, and you want to give to that. Paul's like, no, I didn't even show them a sappy video. He goes, they were just moved entirely on their own. And they urgently pleaded with us. They begged us. Paul's like, I tried to convince them not to. I tried to tell them, hey, we as a church are here to help you. You're in your trial. You're in extreme poverty. We're here to help you. And they're like, no, but Paul, no, we want to be a part. And Paul's like, no, let's just take care of you. And I'm like, no, Paul, please. Why do they plead? Well, it's this last phrase, the privilege of sharing in this service to the Lord's people. Now, there's a lot of words there. Let me just bring this forward 2,000 years, especially into the context of Tri-County Church. You know this phrase, the privilege of sharing in this service to the Lord's people? You know what they were saying? This is how we say it some 2,000 years later. One church right where you are. You know how we say it? We want to be the church. We want to be the church. Wherever you are, we want to be the church. They were saying, hey, Paul, we want to be part of this movement, the church, that gathered of people to tell everyone about Jesus. That's what they're saying. Like, come on, Paul. We see that we're part of something so much bigger. Allow us to be part of that. And not only entirely on their own, Paul goes, they exceeded our expectations. And he's telling the story, like I was there. I witnessed it. I saw it. He goes, they gave themselves first of all to the Lord and then by the will of God also to us. And then Paul goes, hey, church in Corinth, I'm going to give you a high five encouragement, and then I'm going to give you kind of a different type of encouragement. Both are encouragement, and one just feels a little better than the other. So the high five encouragement, Paul goes, hey, but since you excel in everything, and this is an amazing list, and we could spend so much time on this list. He goes, in faith and speech and knowledge and complete earnestness, in the love we have kindled in you. He's like, high five. Hey, church in Corinth, you guys are excelling in those areas. But there's another area I need to encourage you on. And this other area isn't going to feel like this area. Because there's one area you're not excelling in. And he goes, see that you also excel in this grace of giving. Now, the implications of this phrase, grace of giving, I can't highlight enough. You see, God's invisible grace, follow me on this. God's invisible grace, right? We can't see his grace, became visible when Jesus died on the cross for you. Not because you asked for it, not because you deserve it, and not because you could ever repay Jesus back. God's invisible grace became visible on the cross. And this thought is transformational. And Paul is saying, you express your understanding of God's invisible grace by your visible act of giving, your visible act of generosity. Paul's like, God's invisible grace was expressed by his son on the cross, visible. Your understanding that God's invisible grace has enveloped you, his grace, his unmerited favor has covered you, and it becomes visible through your giving. And then Paul's just going to hit a nerve. He goes, hey, I'm not commanding you. I'm not commanding. This isn't a command. Paul carried such an authority, both in his writing, his presence, his leadership in the church. And he goes, hey, this is not a command, but I want to test the sincerity of your love by comparing it with the earnestness of others. Here's what Paul was saying. And we can't miss this. And we can't get what Paul was saying wrong. We can't misinterpret this. What Paul was not saying is, hey, look at your generosity and compare it with someone else. He wasn't saying that. He wasn't telling the church in Corinth, hey, people, look at what you're giving and compare it to what the Macedonians was giving. No. What Paul was saying is, hey, watch, hear, listen to, hold on to the story of the Macedonians and allow their step of faith to inspire you. Allow their stories to encourage you. Look what they're going through, their trials, their poverty, and allow it to stretch your faith. Don't compare it and say, well, if I give this much and they give this much, and now ego and pride gets involved and all that. Paul, no. Let it inspire you. Let it stretch your faith because it's all about God's grace. And he writes, for you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sake he became poor, so that you, through his poverty, might become rich. This is God's grace. God's invisible grace that became visible on a cross for you, for me. God's invisible grace, his unmerited favor that became visible. That became visible. You see, Unlock is all about experiencing God's immeasurably more. And that's for us as a church. But remember, us as a church, it's made up of us. Ones, people, our stories, our unconventional stories. And we as a church, we just want to continue to experience God's immeasurably more. And that's why this season we're in right now, the next 2 years and beyond, it's all about anticipating God's immeasurably more. There's 4 key areas we've been talking about. Your vision doc has it. But here's what I want to make sure we're clear about this. It's all tied to what God is doing in the life of his church. So when we talk about improved spaces, do you realize over the last 2 years, we've been given 3 buildings? Think about that. 2, because we've merged with 2 other churches. The other one is because a nonprofit handed the leadership of that nonprofit to us, and that became square one. Over the last 2 years, we've been given as a church 3 buildings. You know when I share that story with people, because I share that story, you know how people respond to me? Well, how did that happen? 3 buildings. And I have the only church answer I can come up with, I simply say God. And then they say, no, really, how? I'm like, God's just at work. Just God's at work. And I mean that. It's not an offhanded comment. God's doing his immeasurably more. And we just are faithfully following God. But here's the thing, across all of our physical locations, there's just some TLC that needs to be done. This is not like that glamorous one, yay. It's we got some really old buildings. They have really old bathrooms. Have you ever been in an old bathroom before? Ugh. Right? Not glamorous. But think about it. We were given buildings, free. Yes. We just need to give some TLC across all of our physical locations to our buildings that we have as a tool to reach everyone. It's all about our irresistible environments for our kids and teenagers. I hope you know, we want our Kids Rock and Velocity Student Ministry, I tell you, nothing more important than their excitement to share their faith with their friends. For some of you, your stories, parents, for some of your stories, grandparents, some of your stories, because your kids dragged you to church. You were trying to sleep in one Sunday morning, your kid came in and was like, let's go to church, and you wanted to say no, but how can you tell your kid no, right? Especially to church. For some of you saw your teenager's faith erupt, and you're like, whoa, what's going on within, my teenager, right? You're like, I want some of that. When a child's faith comes alive, when a teenager's faith comes alive, it transforms everything. We've been asking people to pray at 3:20 during this whole series, 3:20. People are setting alarms. It's been such a cool thing, just kind of organically. We pray at 3:20. Thursday, our family was packing. We just were trying to get away for 36 hours. We just needed some family time, and so we were in, in that packing mode. If you have kids, parents, you know that fun packing mode. And we're all packing, and all of a sudden, my youngest, Claire, she's in 8th grade, comes running into her bedroom, and she's like, "We gotta pray." I'm like, "What?" She goes, "It's 3:20. We got to pray now." And I'm just being real. As a dad, I'm like, we can pray at 3:35. We're trying to get on the road, Claire. She wanted nothing to do with it. She goes, "No, we're praying now." Next thing you know, I'm standing there holding hands yeah, my 8th grader just got us to pray at 3:20, not 3:35 when we're going to be on the road now. And I got a smile on my face. And do you know the day before, my 8th grader was at play practice at the junior high school? And during play practice, a group of them was sitting off stage because they weren't in that scene. And all of a sudden, her phone alarm went off at 3:20. Another student was sitting with her. Her name's Sydney. And all of a sudden, sitting to her like, "Hey, we got to pray. It's 3:20. And then they had friends sitting around them. And their friends were like, What do you have to do at 3:20? And Claire's like, "Hey, we have to pray. It's 3:20. We have to pray." So Claire's telling me this story. And I go, so what did your friends do when you started to pray? She goes, they didn't know what was going on, but they prayed with us. right? I'm just telling you. Hey, church, like, we want all of our churches to be the place where our kids and our teenagers are dragging their friends, they're dragging their parents, they're dragging their grandparents to church. Like, this is so important. And we just need to get some TLC just to continue to create these environments for our kids and our students. It's all about influential locations. Punxsutawney, they're going every other week right now, and we're trying to get that church to go every week. And I tell you, it's been amazing to see the leadership erupt within that local community. And hear this from me. It's not about having more churches. It's about more people who are following God's unconventional pathway to be part of his immeasurably more, to tell everyone about Jesus, to serve and love everyone. And that's the movement. It's not about more churches. It's about God's immeasurably more, that we want to serve and love people to Jesus. And it's happening in Punxsutawney. And we need to help that church. Ridgeway has outgrown the coffee shop, which is incredible, and we need to help that church. Last week, I talked about our partnership with God Behind Bars. I showed a video about Mrs. T, and if you missed last week, you got to go watch that. Just scrub through the message until you get to that video. I'm fine with that. You got to watch it. And God Behind Bars is all about partnering with churches to plant churches inside of prisons. It's about the everyone. It's about the everyone. So I was messaging with Jake, the founder of God Behind Bars, and I just told him, the overwhelming response across all of our locations last week to God Behind Bars. So I messaged Jake, and I said, Jake, I just want you to know, like, God's moving, but please pray, because this is real. This is not guilt. This is just real. The generosity from within Tri-County Church is going to make that possible or not. Not a guilt statement. I'm just telling you it's real. Jake messaged me back. He goes, I just want to let you know, we had a team of people this last week walking through this correctional institute. They are ready and willing and wanting us to partner with them. And I said, Jake, just continue to pray with us. I believe a movement of generosity is erupting right now within the life of Tri-County Church. I'm just telling you, God is moving, but I just got to wait. I got to wait. But just continue to pray with us. We want to reach everyone, everywhere, because it's about God's immeasurably more. And it's all about God's immeasurable hope. It's what this is all about. It's about the everyone. We don't want to be a big church. Hear that? Our goal is not to be a big church. Our goal is to love everyone in Jesus that we possibly can with the one life that we all have. To love everyone to Jesus, to serve everyone to Jesus. That's our goal. We want to be a part of God's immeasurably more. So there's just two really key dates that are just going to help position us as we anticipate God's immeasurable more. Our night of worship. It's our special unlocked night of worship. And we've been handing out commitment cards. If you haven't had one, you can grab one on your way out. Online, we have a digital resource across all of our locations. And maybe you're ready to turn in your commitment card. Bring it to our night of worship. And we're just going to worship together. Maybe you're still praying about that step of faith. Bring that blank commitment card and just pray over it. Allow the night of worship just to be about your step of faith with God, wherever you are. Because across all of our locations next weekend, on the weekend of November 3rd, actually it's the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. On the 2nd, we have a Saturday night service for the Du Bois Hill campus. On the 4th, we have our last service. It's our online service on Monday nights. We have that and a whole bunch of services on the 3rd. It's going to be our commitment weekend. And what I'm asking from all of you, whether it's your first time here, and I mean that, you're taking a step in an exciting time in the season of God's church. Or maybe you've been here since the very beginning. I'm just asking for all of you to be in. All of you to be in. And maybe for you, being in means you've never given to a church, and this is your first step to give something. That's in. Maybe for you, being in is you used to give to a church and you were hurt by that church and you're like, never again. But maybe your in is taking a step back in. Maybe your generosity has looked like more like, whatever money's in your pocket and you just kind of toss it in. And maybe your step of unlock is to say, I'm going to start giving consistently. God, I'm just going to start consistently giving every month, every week, whatever that looks like for you, I'm just going to take that step. Maybe for you, you'll join me and my wife. We give a percentage. We know what that percentage is, and we just give it. And twice a month, because we give ours online, twice a month, the day after payday, I get an email. And every time that email hits my inbox, I celebrate. I'm like, God, our gift to you in an act of worship, and you continue to fill our financial gap. That's faith. That's faith. And maybe for you, it's upping that percentage. Maybe for you, you have an asset, a piece of property, something that you don't use, or maybe you do use, and you decide to sell it. I don't know what that step is for you. But what I know is there is a group of people some 2,000 years ago that had nothing, and they gave their something. You see, unlock is not about money. It's about the immeasurably more. And God wants to do that in you. Don't miss that. My wife and I have been praying about our commitment. We can't wait to give our commitment. I'm just telling you, it's a step of faith. It's a step of faith. We have a senior going to college. Some of you have gone through this. This is our first, going through this. We just turned in our FAFSA. I've never said FAFSA so many times. I'm not even sure if I'm pronouncing it right. We just turned it in, and we just got the response. I don't know if some person typed in the response or some computer generated the response. My wife shared with me what the government thinks we can afford for our daughter's college. When I heard the number, I laughed out loud. I'm like, honey, are you sure you didn't add a couple zeros to our income? How in the world can we afford that? That's real for us. My wife's car, she's named it. I don't know if you've ever named a car, but my wife's named her car. Her car has 189,000 miles on it, and she's named it Pippa. And it's hilarious because every time she calls the auto dealership, because it needs a lot of love, she'll say, hey, Pippa needs to come back in. And I'm pretty sure the guy that fixes our car, he's never had anyone name their car. But here's what my wife and I know. We could try to buy a new car, and that would take. And we're just not going to, because we want to be a part of what God's doing. And so we're praying for Pippa. You can join us. Pray for Pippa. Who are you praying for? Pippa. Who's Pippa? That's Chris's car. I'm just telling you, this is real. This is just our personal life. Before we came to Tri-County Church, we drained our liquid savings because we came out of a very difficult season of church leadership. And we drained our savings to rest, to heal, and we've just been slowly trying to build that back. Those are our realities. And I'm just telling you, we're taking a step of faith. And here's what we know. God is going to do immeasurably more. I don't know what that's going to look like. I don't. But I can't wait to see it happen, because I have seen God do immeasurably more in the most unconventional ways in our lives every time we've taken a step of faith. Hey, church, let's just be part of that. Watch what God will do in you and through you. And watch what God will do in the life of his church. Come be part of our night of worship. Be part of next weekend. And let's just anticipate God to do what God has been doing for thousands of years. To tell everyone about Jesus.